Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I will be reading some dark romances. Not on KU, so this is not a KU reading vlog. I know that is kind of a staple on my channel, but these are just dark romances. These are romances that some I have found on KU, some are not, and they are some of the darkest romances out there. That's just an opinion, though that is from what I've heard, gathered from what I've heard from people saying like this was incredibly dark, and Goodreads reviews and things like that. So we are going to test that and see if that is true. But without further ado, I will be reading 5 dark romances for this video. I'm not gonna make the intro too long because I will go in depth with each book, but let's get into the vlog portion of the video. Okay, so I am 25% of the way through Untouchables, and Untouchables, and I have to do this update so that I can continue reading, and I'm enjoying it, I guess is like not the best way to describe it, but this, as a bully romance connoisseur, has kind of been my white whale, if you will. I'm incredibly intimidated by this, or I was incredibly intimidated by this, because if you know anything about this book, it is pretty heavy. In the beginning of the book we have Zoe, who is in her senior year of high school, and she gets assaulted by the hero and 2 of his friends. One of them had groped her. She basically got him kicked off of the football team, but like nothing really else happened, and since then everybody in the school has kind of hated her, because like the football team is like, it's like a football town or whatever. And so they corner her in a classroom, and the hero, Carter, forces her to give him a blowjob, and he says either you're going to give me a blowjob or I'm going to rape you. And she keeps using that word like over and over again, and he doesn't care. And he's at this 25% mark, still not ever apologized for it, ever given an excuse. Not that there is one, or a reason, not that there ever is one. And from what I gather, like, he's never going to. It's very much not a morality chain. It's legitimately like he's a fucked up person, and it's more about whether she's willing to accept that about him or not. They just had a consensual hookup scene. He fingered her to orgasm, and she gave him a blowjob, and it was very much a scene where she was like, either this is going to be forced on me, or I can try to make this a little less traumatic and not necessarily give in, but like submit, I guess. And that's sort of the tone of the book. Like, he has decided that he wants her in more than just like a sexual way, and he's seducing her, I guess, or like just being generally an okay person to her. Like, he's talking to her, taking her out, buying her gift cards for places because he knows her family doesn't have any money. And like, it's not romantic in any way. Like, I would not say that this is a romance in the traditional sense. It's hard to read, in that you feel very enamored with Carter, and so does she, and it's almost like this dissonance of, I think especially as a reader, because you're going into this knowing it's a romance, you are always particularly inclined to want to have the redeemed hero, or just like have the swoony hero. So you almost, just like the heroine is, you're looking for reasons to like make what he did okay, like, even though you know, obviously, like, you know that's not an okay thing, and like you want a redemption in there somewhere. If you like, as in a fictional world, obviously, like not in the real world in any capacity could this be redeemed, but you almost want to start to see threads. And I think that this is a super common thing, especially with like bodice rippers, and there's a lot of like in-depth conversations that you could have about why women read bodice rippers or reads that feature assault scenes between the hero and the heroine, and you could certainly discuss that at length. There's it's an interesting read, I think, and it's interesting to read my own biases and read the heroine trying to make sense of her own trauma and almost like reclaim the power with him, while also knowing that like he doesn't in any way feel bad about what he's done. And there are several scenes where she makes comments about like, I need to make sure that he's not doing this to other women, because he's sort of forced her into silence, knowing that he's this like football player who everybody looks up to, and he like runs the team and he's going to be protected no matter what. She doesn't feel like she can speak up, and so she has to battle with the idea of, okay, if I don't speak up, who else is he hurting? And also, why is this happening? And so she feels this like fascination with him and with figuring out why he is the way he is, and why what happened. And it's just it's interesting. Like I said, I would not consider this a romantic romance in any way. I can understand the people that give this 1 star. I can understand the people that give this 5 stars. It's good. Like it's well written. It's very self-aware. It's not one of those stories that like making it 1 seem like an okay thing, 2 seem like a redeemable thing, or 3, it's not making the heroine force herself or through the power of his attractiveness or his power or his money or the love or whatever, through the romantic feelings. It's not making her suddenly okay with what's happening, if that makes sense. Like it's not as if it's making her redeem him without any redemption being there, if that makes sense. As far as I know, and again, I'm only 25% of the way through, this is very much she is fully aware of who he is. He's never going to change, and it is about whether that is an acceptable character or an acceptable person for her to spend her life with or be romantically involved with. I get why people love it. I get why people hate it. It's hard to read. Like I said, this was sort of the story that I was greatly intimidated by. The opening scene was one of those where I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to continue, because I didn't know where we were going. And I still don't know, like, is it gonna get worse? Is it gonna get better as far as like the assaults, like what's gonna happen? I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna come back and update you at the 50% mark and we'll see. But at the moment it's good. Like it's an easy read. The writing is good. The writing is above average for sure. And I'm fascinated for sure to see where the story is going to go. So I am officially 50% of the way through. I'm getting kind of bored. Aside from the forced taking of her virginity, not much has happened. I mean, now they're like fully in a relationship. They're doing couple things, meeting parents, going to football games. Not much is going on, and I'm a little bit bored. But I'm kind of hoping that some like conflict is about to come up, because it feels like a bunch of little things are like showing up. Little conflicts are coming up and they're kind of being breezed over. So I'm hoping that like something juicy is about to happen. My thoughts haven't really changed aside from the fact that I'm getting bored. We haven't really learned a whole lot. We've met Carter's family. His dad's an asshole. That's kind of all we've gotten so far. So I will come back to you when I'm done. Take it away. Tell us about the book. Interesting. Yes. Thanks for the help. I'm 78% of the way through Unbreakable, Untouchable, and I just want all of you to know that I'm bored out of my fucking mind. Alright, so I finished. I ended up giving it 2 stars, and I think the issue that I have is in my expectations, because the way that people talk about this book and the controversy surrounding it and everything, I expected this to almost be like a Pam Godwin-esque story where it's like traumatic and the characters are exploring their trauma together. Because at one point we were going through the idea of like safe CNC, you know, bedroom play, rape fantasy, like things like that. And so I thought that we were going in the way of exploration, and so we were going to be working through trauma and growing together, and the entire book was just like typical bully romance tropes, like cheating, pregnancies, other woman shit, like over and over, the same cycles, the same fights, the same drama, and it just wasn't what I thought the story was going to be, and it was overly long. Like, if this had just been a very typical story, the fact that it's 488 pages or 480 pages, 90 pages, whatever it is too long for a story like this. When you have the very like cliche, typical other woman drama, pregnancy scares, like that kind of bullshit, like I think 500 pages of that is too much. We're getting too much of the same stuff, too much cycling. There's only so many times I can hear the same fight, hear the same drama without getting bored, and that's the issue that I had here. Like there wasn't anything about this that I thought was new and interesting, aside from obviously the draw of the story, like the darkness of the story, the tabooness, or whatever you want to call it. Beyond that, once that was passed and they established their relationship in whatever way that they wanted to, it was just boring and typical and not what I was anticipating, and it just was too long. So I am very disappointed, because I thought that this was going to be something, like it was going to be a new favorite, it was going to be something that like broke the genre, I guess, or was not the usual in the genre, but it definitely was. So I'm going to get into Tears of Tess, and I will talk to you at the 25% mark. Okay, so friends, last night I finished Tears of Tess, and I was going to update you at the 25 and 50% mark, but quite frankly I didn't have too much to say. If you have ever read a captor-captive, like human trafficking story, you've read this one. It wasn't anything particularly memorable, and these stories don't generally stick with me or do much for me. So I ended up getting the audiobook for this, which by the way sounds like it's filmed in a tin can. It starts off the story with Tess and her boyfriend Brax going on vacation together to Mexico, and she ends up getting kidnapped to people who end up selling her to the hero. And it's kind of your typical story. She ends up becoming like a slave or whatever for him, and there's some drama. I will say I'm interested in continuing, just because like the reveals at the end were pretty interesting about how the story is going to go, but it's not a high priority for me in any way. Like I said, these stories they're just not quite that interesting to me. So I then got 25% of the way through Sick Fucks, and I am enjoying this. So this is the story of Dolly and Rabbit. That's the names that they go by in the story. They have like actual names, or they have names aside from that, but those are like those are what they call each other and everything. And in the beginning of the story, they meet each other because Rabbit, who is the hero, his father moves to an estate next to Dolly's, and they become friends, and then his father ends up dying and he moves in with Dolly and her father. After he moves in, the sexual abuse between Rabbit and the uncles and the dad start up. So Dolly is 10-ish and he's like 12 or 13. I think he's a couple of years older than her, and there is on-page sexual assaults. It's not super descriptive. It does the thing where it's like, I felt the pain sort of thing, like where it's implied what's happening, but it happens with both of them. Like you get the scene with both of them, their first assault scene. And then we flash forward to this happening a couple of times, and then the night. So it starts with him, like it starts with his assault, and then on Dolly's 10th birthday, that's when it starts with her, and we flash to the 10th birthday, and after Rabbit sees that she has been assaulted, he kills one of her uncles, and this lands him in this like remote water tower where all like the powerful people of this town or whatever keep problem people, I guess. And so he gets put with these two men in a cell who teach him how to read and write, how to fight, and they end up escaping together. And we are now at the 25% mark. He has gone back to the house where all of this happened, and Dolly is she's alone. Like there's nobody living in the house with her besides her nanny, and she's obviously, you know, 10 years older or whatever, so I think they're like in their 20s at this point. And she is deeply dissociated, and she doesn't respond, she doesn't walk, she doesn't like even look at people, and he is able to get her to respond by creating this like world, wonderland world. So the fantasies around her, like this is a Alice in Wonderland story, but it's Alice and the Rabbit, I think, as far as I know. And she basically crafts this story that they're leaving the house and they're going to Wonderland. He's able to get her to sort of come back into herself out of her catatonic state by convincing her of this. And so she is she believes that they are going to Wonderland, and he plans to track down the people that abused her and him and kill them. And that's kind of how it's going so far. I do know that like that's not the only assault we see on page. It's not the worst thing I've ever read, but it's deeply uncomfortable, obviously, because it's not like, it's a flashback, so you're there while it's happening. It's not as if the characters are just telling you in the present that it happened in the past, if that makes sense. And I know that like this, it's a reoccurring thing, like these flashbacks keep coming up, so I know that it's something that I'm gonna have to keep reading, but it's not so descriptive that it's like I can't read it, if that makes sense. So I am enjoying it. I'm interested to see where the story is going to go. I have read I've tried to read a couple books by Tilly Cole before, and I hated the way they were written, so I'm hoping that this one will stick with the way that it's written, that I'll continue to enjoy it, and I'll come back to you at the 50% mark with my thoughts. 55% of the way through, still loving it. They're still just murdering people, and it's good. So last night I finished Sick Fucks, and I did end up giving this 4 stars. If you are a fan of like slashers and romance, I think that you will really enjoy this book. It's basically just them going around and killing all of the people that have wronged them. Very much like Mindfuck-esque. Like if you're a fan of Mindfuck but don't mind like very dark themes, you'll enjoy it. It's definitely a lot darker, like you're reading pages of torture and things like that. So I think if you like those things, if you don't mind darker things, you'll enjoy this. I will say that it continually brings up the childhood sexual trauma, and it's not as if you get the initial scene and then it ends after that. So obviously that's hard to read, but you're also getting points of view of a detective who was in their past, and like it's good. It's a good story. It's well written. I don't think I would read anything else by Tilly Cole, just because I think this is like a one-off for her. Not as far as like she writes other dark books, but I then got 20 to 30% of the way through Still Beating. And this one is a book that I had started previously in my try a chapter tag, and I had rated the first chapter like an average rating, and then when I started it this time, I wanted to get through to when they escape to update you, so that's like 30% of the way through. So this is the story of 2 people who are related, like they're going to be future siblings-in-law. Like the hero is with her sister, and in the beginning of the story they are celebrating her sister's birthday at the bar, and they end up both getting kidnapped and taken to this like serial killer's basement, and they get locked up and they're forced to endure traumas, mainly the heroin in the beginning, and then he starts forcing him to rape the heroine, the hero to rape the heroine. And then they eventually get out, and that's kind of where I left off, and we're at the 30% mark. And I know the majority of this story is like them working through their traumas. So I know that I'm not at the I'm not past the hardest part of the story. I think just altogether this is like a hard one to read, pretty emotional, because obviously they're gonna have to deal with the traumas and things that they have endured, but also dealing with the fact that they are completely different people who have gone through something that most people never experience in their life, and they are going to have to try to like live a life with what they've endured, and also deal with the people who are like, why can't you just like get back to normal, or people that just don't understand like their trauma responses. So I'm excited to get into this. I've heard great things. There are people that are like, this is the best romance I've ever read. So I'm interested to see how the story goes and how I feel about it. As far as the descriptions around the assaults and things like that, when it's the captor assaulting her, it's fade to black. She just mentions like dissociating, and then you go to the next chapter where it's like a next day. And then when it comes to the hero, there is descriptions of what's happening, but it's not like mega descriptive. Like, it's not talking about like the pain and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna come back to you at the 50-ish% mark with my thoughts and how it's going. Hopefully we can get another 4 or 5 star out of this one. Sick Fucks I gave 4 stars. I don't remember if I said that. I really enjoyed it. Just wasn't like the perfect read. I think I would have liked a little bit more. I don't know what would have made it a 5 star, but it was definitely like a good. It was good. It was solid. It was good. So, all right, I'm gonna come back to you at the 50% mark and tell you how it's going. 50% in, and it is deeply emotional to read them. It's mostly from Dean, the hero's point of view at this point, but it's very emotional to read him trying to cope with everything. He has started seeing a therapist, but he's not being completely honest, and he really abuses alcohol, and he's fighting these feelings for the heroin, but he's also struggling to maintain his relationship with his fiance, and he's also not able to find solace in anybody but the heroin. But that's hard for him because like they can't really do anything together, obviously, because he's engaged to her sister, and he there's been multiple scenes where they, you know, talk all night on the phone together, or they like sleep in the same bed together just to kind of like find some solace with each other. And it's just very emotional to read the way that they are like hurting each other while also trying to find relief in each other. So 50% of the way through, it's fantastic. So I'll update you when I'm done. So I just finished Still Beating, and this was like a very high 4 star. If I had to imagine why it's not a 5 star for me, I would say it is because it didn't explore their trauma as much as I would have wanted. So when I finish the book, or when I finish books in general, I usually have a pretty good idea of my feelings on it rating wise, and I'll usually go to Goodreads and read reviews that are like the opposite rating of what I would have given it. So I was between a 4 and a 5, so I went and read some 1 star and like 2 star reviews, and a lot of them said things like the heroine was unlikable, which like I didn't have a massive issue with, or she was like not like other girls, which again I didn't have a massive issue with or notice really. But one review did comment about how especially the hero's trauma is not really well explored, especially the things that he was like made to do. It's a lot to do with what the heroine is going through, and there are mentions of the hero having to, you know, he like self-medicates with alcohol, but there isn't a lot of conversation around the healing that he did for himself. It's a lot, or almost all, to do with the heroin. And there is an 8-month skip where a lot of like the healing took place off page, and I feel like that was a sort of a missed opportunity because I was missing that emotional element of the story. A lot of it felt like it was just this toxic cycle of them hooking up or wanting to be together and not being able to be together, and I would have liked a little more exploration of like how they actually got to the end point of like healing themselves so that they could work in a healthy relationship together. So I couldn't give it the full 5 stars because I did feel like there was some of that emotional aspect missing, but overall it is a very good book. The writing is very, very strong, and I would definitely want to read more from this author. I think that she handled the trauma and the like all of the emotional aspects of the story very well, and I believe like the HEA, like I liked their relationship. I believe that they were a healthy working couple at the end, and I believe that they were like meant to be together. I think she did a good job of establishing that they would have ultimately ended up together through the flashbacks of them and their relationship over the years, which I didn't really mention because it doesn't play like a massive part, but it establishes that like if this traumatic thing hadn't happened to them, they still probably would have ended up together. So overall, I think the author did a good job of establishing a like puzzle piece romance, puzzle piece relationship. They work well together, and by the end they are a healthy couple, but I just wish we had explored more of like how they got there, less of like the toxicity of them going in this cycle and more of like the growth as well. So that is that book. The last book I'm going to read for this video is Deliver, probably the one I'm most nervous about, aside from Untouchable or whatever that was. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm going to start that and I will update you at the 25% mark. Okay friends, so I am a little over halfway through Deliver Me? Deliver Me. I can't remember whichever it is. And I'm enjoying it more than the typical captor-captive like sex trafficking story. So in the beginning of this you have the hero and the heroine, can't remember their names, Liv and Josh. Josh is like a college football star, and in the beginning of the book, Liv hunts him down for the purposes of she's a deliverer, so she finds slaves for people that purchase them from her organization. She determines that Josh is the perfect fit for this buyer, and she kidnaps him, and she is training him to fit the role of what the buyer wants, and part of that is to make him hate women. Okay, I don't remember exactly where I was because my camera died. So she kidnaps him, and one of the requirements of the buyer has like several requirements. One of them is that it's a straight guy that hates women and only wants to be with their master. So part of her requirements, or like part of what she has to do, is she has to make him hate women, and that involves like really intense sexual abuse, but only from her, with her partner occasionally like coming in for like sexual things, because he's only supposed to want to be sexually he's supposed to be ready for like men, I guess, and be able to perform with men. So she has to perform like intense sexual abuse against him so that he will start to hate her. And so they kidnap him, they take him to this locked cell where it's like her bedroom that only she has access to. They start this torture of him, and her partner is this guy named Van, who was like the guy that kidnapped her. He became part of this organization of human traffickers when he was younger. She was one of his people that he was supposed to be training, and he ended up impregnating her because the people are supposed to save virgins, but he, you know, raped her and got her pregnant, and to basically in order for her to stay alive. And so she has become a deliverer, and so she's trained like 8 other dudes or whatever, but she has this very like tough relationship with Van. He's very much abusive. She still feels like she doesn't like him romantically, but she still feels a sort of connection with him, I guess. And so they start torturing Josh, and he like almost immediately feels like she's not being like authentic, like she's not really a bad person, and like maybe she is doing this because she's being forced to do this. Like he intuits this. I don't know how this comes upon him, because surely if I was kidnapped and being raped and all of that, or being assaulted, I would not know. Anyway, so he feels this like kinship with her, I guess, or like this emotional connection with her, and refuses to believe that she's doing this because she's a bad person. And so they start having like this romantic connection. They start doing like, he like forces her, she forces him to like orgasm a bunch and does like sexual things with him, and there hasn't been any rape, just like other sexual assaults. It's not bad by any means, but like I said previously, these sort of stories just aren't super interesting to me. Reading a book that is 90% like sexual trauma and sexual abuse is just not something that, it keeps my attention in that like it's horrific obviously, but it's not something that I love reading about. Like obviously this is better than any captive I've ever read, because it's Pam Godwin and her writing is just amazing, and so her ability to make you believe in the characters' feelings and like have them fully realized and flesh out characters is outstanding, regardless of the story that you're reading. But the story itself is just not something that's like super memorable to me. It's definitely going to be a 4-star because like it's a good story, it's well written, I understand the characters, they feel like real people, I understand their motivations, and I do feel the romance. I don't necessarily know if I like, I don't know. It's with these stories, it's like, do you really feel the romance? Like, do you really believe that they would work out? Because like ultimately one of them is a sex trafficker, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, do you really feel the romance, or it's, I don't know. I believe that they would like work together just like psychologically, like how that dynamic happens and stuff. But like if you took them off the street, would they really be a good couple? You know what I mean? So like, I'm gonna give it 4 stars because it's a good story. Is it a good romance? It doesn't quite have those feelings that Pam Godwin has, where it's just like they feel like a puzzle piece, you know? So I'm gonna update you again probably when I'm done, because I'm listening to an audiobook, and so it's like really hard to get to the 25, 50%, and 75% mark, because Audible doesn't really do that. But I'm gonna get back to playing my video game and listening to my audiobook, and we will talk again when it's done, and then we'll finish out the video finally. Okay friends, I have finished Deliver, so it is time to wrap up this video. I did end up giving Deliver 4 stars. I think it was a great ending, and like I said, Pam Godwin is just such a good writer that it's hard to say that like this is your average story or this is an average story, because her writing is just so strong, so in depth, that it just makes everything feel a step above the average. So this is not your average captive. It definitely feels more emotional, and maybe the relationship feels a little bit more believable, but again, these sorts of stories just aren't ever my perfect story, and that wasn't really any exception here. But I still would recommend it if you enjoy those stories and if you are looking for a read from Pam Godwin. This is pretty dark. There is on-page rape and various other things going on, so it's a dark read. Not nearly as dark as maybe I anticipated, just from the way that people talk about it, but I'm sort of finding that dark my dark line is a little bit further out than I really thought it was. So yes, definitely would love to hear your thoughts down below. If you have read anything that I read in this video, I would love to hear it. If you don't have anything to say, leave a black heart emoji down in the comments. If you are looking for more content from me, you can find me on Instagram. You can also follow my podcast Instagram. You can also follow my podcast on all your favorite streaming platforms. It is a horror podcast. And thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in my next one.